Welcome, everyone, to Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. Ben Shelton is a Masters 1000 champion. He wins the biggest title of his career at the 2025 National Bank Open in Toronto in an excellent three-set win over Karen Khachanov. May have not been the most blockbuster final coming in terms of anticipation, but it delivered. Really, really good effort by both. We will get into that, plus a preview of the Western and Southern Open in Cincinnati. If you're watching on YouTube, I know this is very backlit, but I tried to give you a nice, lovely lake view. This is Lake Norman in North Carolina behind me. Very, very beautiful place. I talked about it at the start of the last mailbag. Made these plans a long time ago, and didn't know that it was going to be a Thursday final. All right, let's talk about Ben Shelton. We've actually talked a lot about him on the show recently. We did a segment specifically, basically on Shelton on 3 a couple weeks ago, because I found him in this moment of time to be the most interesting player in the world as far as debating who is he going to be and what is he going to be able to do in his career. Not as if 1 week answers those questions, but the reason I thought that was such an interesting topic is because I thought there were very valid tennis arguments on both ends of the spectrum. Those who said Ben can win slams in the future. I think they had a lot to go on, a lot to argue for. Those who said, I don't see it. I think the ranking is overinflated. I don't think he's actually in that group that should be expected to challenge Alcaraz and Sinner in the future. I think that group, I'll use the past tense, I think that group had a lot of great arguments, maybe still has a lot of great arguments, and that's why I thought it was such a terrific discussion. But that's also part of why this was so significant, because a run like this, a week like this, was precisely part of what was missing from Ben Shelton's body of work. He was coming in, and I haven't rechecked the stats from what they were last week because that would be besides the point, but obviously they also haven't changed that much because it's only a handful of matches. Ben Shelton, coming into the week, was a 53% win rate player in best of 3-set matches who had never made it past a Masters 1000 quarterfinal. And he's young, but he's not that young at 22 years old. So that's why it felt like he needed something like this to solidify that status as a threat, somebody on their way to the top. He needed a run like this. The majors have been awesome, but he's had some draw help. One top 10 win over Tiafoe at the U.S. Open a couple years ago. Tough opponents, actually, once he got deep. A lot of Sinner, a lot of Alcaraz, a Djokovic match. But, in those runs at the majors, which have kept him high up on the rankings, kept him in the conversation, that have really been the best part of his career so far, he's had some draw help in those. He's done great to take advantage, but this was 4 top 20 wins in a row. Caboli, de Minaur, Fritz, Khachanov. 3 third-set tiebreaks. Let me just start here. I felt this way during the Caboli match, which I was calling another match simultaneously, but I had eyes on that particular match, where Caboli served for it at 5-3 or 5-4 in the third. I forget which one. Didn't seal the deal, and Shelton was the better player from there. I think, man, you've really got to kill Shelton when you have him. Because if you're in a situation where the match has now come down to just a couple of points, or the set has come down to just a couple of points, he's not going to be scared. He is not going to play scared. I've never seen him play scared. I've never really seen him play tight. I've seen him maybe struggle with some decision-making as far as making low percentage choices in big moments, but I've never really seen him play tight. Whoever he's playing is probably going to play a little bit scared when the match comes down to those couple of points. That's natural. That's what we normally see. Ben Shelton is different. You can poke holes in his game. You could never really say that he isn't a clutch guy who raises his level in the moments where you'd want a tennis player to be at their very, very best. I also noticed this week, particularly in the de Minaur win and the Fritz win, that Shelton was doing a much better job of hanging in baseline rallies with great baseliners. The stuff that stood out to me, let me not say stuff, let me say that the thing that stood out to me throughout the week, it felt like it clicked for Ben Shelton that he doesn't need to win a point in order to win a point. And great shot makers, like offensive shot-making players with a lot of exuberance and a lot of options and a high level of firepower, it usually takes those kinds of players some time before they figure this part of the game out. Even, I know Jim Courier talks about Jose Higueras, his coach, eventually getting through to him on this particular point. And it was the biggest, Jim always says, and it's always stuck in my head, this is the best advice that he ever got from a tennis coach in his life. You don't have to win a point to win a point. Sometimes you just have to not lose it. And this was a week in which I saw Shelton more often playing with a little more height and spin on his forehand, staying disciplined on his backhand, maybe assuming a slightly deeper court position, basically locking it down and feeling as if, because this is the best I've ever seen him move, feeling as if I don't miss, I'm fast enough and skilled enough defensively that I'm actually hard to beat. And I saw him go into that mode. Now, obviously, short balls on the forehand, Ben's going to get after it. And there's going to be moments where from the back of the court, he's going to pull the trigger. And he's not going to be shy about that. And that's great. He'll never change that, and he shouldn't. But there were more moments where 7th shot of the rally, 8th shot of the rally, neutral forehand, and he's playing that ball safe, loopy, cross-court. He's playing the backhand deep middle, and he's saying, I'm here. Let's keep going. And that kind of rally tolerance felt pretty new. And his defense, to me, has never stood out so much throughout matches. Now, did he get faster overnight? Did Ben Shelton get faster overnight? Probably not. Definitely worked on his movement throughout the year. Definitely the fastest version of himself, but there shouldn't be that drastic difference. To me, it was a tactical mindset shift of, it's okay if I defend a little bit. I'm good. I'm actually hard to beat when I play this way. He beat de Minaur in the 9+ shot rallies, and he beat him by some distance. That was very notable. I also thought that he was returning from deeper in the court on a more regular basis, which was another indication that he didn't mind covering ground. He didn't mind not being in control of points right away. He wanted to make balls, and he actually wanted to do some running, and he was relishing that aspect of the game. Backhand, which is usually the weak link in rallies, it also had some very, very solid stretches throughout the week. First set against Khachanov, definitely one of the reasons why he lost the set. I thought he made too many errors off of that wing in the opening set against Khachanov. But overall, it was a good showing for Shelton's backhand. Hands looked looser sometimes, but, I don't know. He just was feeling that shot better than I've seen at times. One thing against Khachanov with the backhand, he was slicing 1 in every 3 backhands. It's a very effective move against Karen. Always has been. Make him move inside the court. Because if you make him move inside the court, he's going to hit the shot and go backwards. So now we have a guy moving backwards. We have a guy who likes to give himself some extra space to defend and trade, but we're moving him inside the court where he's actually taking away his own time on the next ball. And he's got the Western grip on the forehand from low contact points. Khachanov really can't flatten the ball out and hurt you. There were select moments where Karen was able to hurt Shelton off the slice. And Ben's slice, by the way, I still think actually gets pretty floaty a lot of the times. I mean, he hits some good ones, he hits some bad ones. We're not talking about a consistently well-executed slice backhand like Dan Evans or Lorenzo Musetti. But it was such a good tactic against Khachanov as a player that it ended up paying big dividends for him. Why do I make that point? Because one thing that Shelton does have in his favor on the backhand is variety and the ability to tackle his tactics based on who he's playing. Am I playing somebody who doesn't like slice? I'll give him slice. Am I playing somebody who's going to eat up my slice? Like Carlos Alcaraz? Maybe we're not slicing as much. That's a positive for Ben. Notably, the Khachanov final was not one of those matches where Shelton was out rallying his opponents. Karen was the better ball striker for most of the match, maybe not in certain key moments, but I think for the majority of the match, Khachanov was the more consistent baseliner. I saw this matchup coming in as a matchup between discipline and shot making, and which one would win out, although Shelton has been playing more disciplined. But I thought Khachanov had some good moments. If you look at the first set tiebreak, just how well he played from 5-4 down in that breaker, very impressive. I think Khachanov was able to execute his power baselining to take control in some big moments with really admirable consistency. He's never going to be that guy who can beat you in one shot, but he can beat you in four. And this was one of those matches where the timing was good enough, the control was good enough, where he had no problem stringing together 4 offensive ground strokes in a row. Shelton did not get the better of the baseline rallies in this final, but he dominated the short stuff. The 1 through 4 stuff was all Shelton. Now, one, I think Khachanov struggled with the action on Shelton's serve, which a lot of players struggle with. It's one thing when Shelton hits the corner and it's an ace or it's an unreturnable, and all right, he hit the ball 138 in the corner. That's going to happen sometimes. There's going to be nobody in the world who can deal with that. But then you have a further question of what about when Ben misses his spot? What happens there? And I did feel as if Khachanov, even on occasions where Shelton had a slice serve that didn't go wide enough on the ad side, Karen still missed a lot of returns because the movement and the speed, that cocktail that Shelton brings on his serve, a lot of players have a lot of difficulty just returning cleanly and controlling the ball off the string bed, and Khachanov certainly did. First serve unreturned stats, Shelton 49%, Khachanov 19%. Second serves unreturned. Similarly, Shelton 38%, Khachanov 16%. So just in the free points battle, Shelton won going away. I've always felt that part of the reason why Khachanov, although he's had a great career, hasn't had a better career is because although he is 6'6" and a good mover for his size, but not necessarily a good mover for a top 15 player, he's not been able to build as big a serve weapon as maybe his height would have allowed him to in an ideal world. It's not prime Medvedev. It's certainly not Zverev. Obviously, he played great to beat Zverev in the semifinals for just his 5th, I'll give the stat later when I do the Cincy preview, 5th top 5 win next to 34 losses. So I think one of the reasons why he hasn't been able to punch up more often is because he can get outserved by players. And when you're 6'6", you don't want to be getting outserved by players, but he did tonight, last night rather. And then you have the finishing. Right? And one more thing on this point. Shelton is shorter, but look at the difference in their technique. I'm not going to get super in-depth right now or detailed, which is not my bread and butter anyway when it comes to serve technique, but look how big a difference there is in the amount of energy Shelton is loading up in his trophy position, how much deeper his front hip which, because he's a lefty, would be his right hip, how much deeper that gets into the baseline, how much steeper the shoulder tilt is, how much more explosive the legs are throughout the service delivery, how much more energy in terms of the swing path and more momentum is built up into the swing path on the trophy position. There, you can look at all of these technical points that you want to hit on a serve. Does Khachanov hit them? Yes, but Shelton physiologically hits them on a more extreme level that is so athletic. It's very Andy Roddick-like, the way he's able to really coil up his body in a way that I think a lot of players would have trouble executing. That's why Shelton's serve is bigger. It's really a technique thing. It's not a height thing. It's not a strength thing, because Khachanov's a big, strong guy also with a pretty live arm himself. Maybe Shelton's is more live. Anyway, behind the serve, after the serve, there's also a finishing aspect to this. Khachanov hits big, but he does not finish well. He's not super precise, especially on his forehand. There's not a lot of net rushing threat, although he was very efficient at the net against Shelton. He's, of course, very selective about when he comes in. And there's not a lot of drop shot threat either. Thought he did a good job against Zverev to start to incorporate that a little bit more often. Of course, against Zverev, that's high on the scouting report of things you should probably do. So he did well there. But in general, Khachanov is very, very tough in baseline rallies. That's his strength. When you're in neutral ball striking against him, good quality, great consistency, great physicality. All of those things are Khachanov's strengths. But on that first ball to follow up the serve, is he super deadly? Does he finish off points well when he has balls to attack as well as some others? Not really. As well as Shelton? No. Shelton's forehand has more horsepower, and he's in behind it all the time. And I thought that was an aspect of the short point deficit as well. So not just the unreturns, but what do you do with that first ball that you have to attack, and is it ever neutralized? Shelton, not usually neutralized. Khachanov, quite a bit. So 1 through 4 shot rallies were 74 to 58 Shelton, and I believe everything I just talked about is why. Despite Khachanov actually winning most of the long points against Ben, this was not a repeat of the De Minaur match. Shelton still won. By the way, this was a super close match. Very, very close match, obviously. Third set tiebreak. First set, they won the same number of points. I mentioned that Khachanov did an awesome job down the stretch of the first set tiebreak. Khachanov also saved 3 set points in the first set. He hit a slice serve out wide that I thought Ben should have returned and looked a little bit stiff on a backhand, which can happen with Shelton. That was the first of the set points. The next, Khachanov, excellent serve, put away a sitter. And on ad out, this was a great point where Khachanov kind of kept it to Ben's backhand. Shelton was slicing the ball a lot. Karen was kind of hanging in, not missing off the slice, not really taking control off the slice, but just, staying very patient. And eventually Khachanov went deep middle and got a well-earned forehand error from Shelton, who was knocked a little bit off balance by the depth on Karen's ball. So 3 good set points saved. I think all first serves, maybe other than the ad-out point, I forget, but the first 2 were all first serves. And Khachanov ends up kind of stealing this first set tiebreak. After Khachanov did initially serve for it, though, right? I think so, if I remember correctly in the first set. No, I think that's wrong. Ignore me on that. There's one little twist that I'm forgetting in the first set. But anyway, in the second set was 4-all, and Shelton went God mode in a return game. Used a backhand slice cross court to get Khachanov to lift up on a forehand and take a little bit off from that low contact point with the Western grip. Again, it's hard for Khachanov to always hit big from that position. So now you move him inside the court, you get the weaker cross-court ball, and Shelton burns him with a big backhand down the line. Not always the easiest for Shelton to execute that particular finish, but he did on that occasion to get to 15-30. Then Shelton hit a huge backhand cross court. He had some time to load up on a backhand, and he actually did a ton of damage to set up a forehand finish. And on the set point, Shelton forehand down the line winner, surprising Khachanov. Ben was way, way, way behind the baseline. And he hits a forehand down the line winner from a position where most players you just feel completely safe against. Only if you have the kind of artillery that Shelton has can you finish a point from back there. But it felt good. Shelton felt the positioning was good. And the timing was feeling good. And he knew that if he executed the shot, Khachanov wasn't necessarily looking for it and wasn't necessarily in a great position to defend. So Ben went after it from a position where most coaches would say, do not try to hit a winner from there. Shelton made it work. So that's the shot-making flair and some of that high-end stuff that we see sometimes from Shelton. In the tiebreak, I want to first bring up, third set tiebreak that is, that Khachanov never lasted until the fourth shot on a return point. So return, one more shot from Shelton's perspective, from Khachanov's perspective. Khachanov never made a fourth shot in play on a return point in the tiebreak. This was the big story of the match for Shelton, is that he was able to, win these quick points on serve with his serve +1. And in the tiebreak, that's what we saw. We saw a lot of unreturnables. We saw some +1 balls that Ben was able to put away. 2 mini breaks, 7-3. The first mini break was just on the first point of the tiebreak, Khachanov just burying a neutral forehand into the net on forced error. And the second mini break was Shelton hitting another savage forehand winner, not only from the back fence, but also on a first serve return. Double special. Missed spot by Khachanov. Shelton with the deep return position to buy himself the maximum amount of time to take a big cut on the first serve return. I also think it, as I mentioned earlier, it just speaks to how good Shelton feels about his movement. Like, I'll start the point on the back fence. I'll make up the ground. I'll defend on the first ball from a deep position if I need to. Didn't have to do any defending on this point. He came up with a very special forehand return. It reminded me of that Tiafoe win at the U.S. Open in the quarterfinals 2 years ago, where he hit some massive forehand down the line return winners on the ad side. Not something that a right-hander is really going to cover, especially on a first serve. You hit a first serve, you're looking forehand, you're not about to scramble to your right in any effective manner. All right, that's what I got on the Canada final. So now let's go to the Cincy preview. I'll try to run through things somewhat efficiently since we're already 23 and a half minutes in. Obviously, I guess I'll apologize for this coming out after the main draw has already begun, but schedule-wise and just the way everything has worked out, doing the best I can. What can I say? Not really a fan of how this has played out with the schedule, with the Thursday final and then the Cincinnati starting on the day of the Canada final. I think it cheapens it a little bit. It cheapens both events a little bit, in my view, but that's neither here nor there. Jannik Sinner is back. He's the top seed. He's got Musetti, Ruud, Paul, Mahach, FAA, Diallo, and Tsitsipas. My dark horse is Arthur Rinderknecht. My upset alert is Stefanos Tsitsipas. My early popcorn is wait for the third round. Let's start with Rinderknecht. He beat Borges pretty easily yesterday. So most of the players, or all of the players in this quarter, actually played their first round matches yesterday. Rinderknecht, impressive 6-3, 6-3 over Borges. Good score line. Not that I watched it. He now gets Ruud. Didn't love what I saw from Casper Ruud last week in Toronto at a hard court event, which has historically been one of his best. I felt he was struggling to hold court position, struggling to dictate with his forehand, struggling with the drive, backhand return. And Rinderknecht plays that downhill style where he can get in on Ruud's backhand, be deadly on short balls. He's been playing really well since the Jannik Sinner match in the opening round of Roland Garros. I actually really was thoroughly unimpressed with how Rinderknecht was playing in the first half of 2025, but since that match, I've actually been impressed. And Felix would be his third round seed. You don't know what you're going to get with Felix these days. He has not had a lot of great runs. Definitely hasn't had a consistent season. So there's some opportunity, in my opinion, for Rinderknecht if he plays this right as dark horse. Upset alert is Stefanos Tsitsipas, but I do want to point out that you could basically make an argument for anyone here to be on upset alert outside of Sinner. You have Musetti, who's lost early in both Washington and Canada, so he's in a slump. You have Ruud, who I mentioned didn't look great last week. Hasn't loved Cincinnati historically. This is quick for Casper, without a doubt. You've got Tommy Paul coming off of injury, first event back. Tomas Mahach is Mahach. He's been pretty upset prone. FAA has been pretty upset prone. Diallo is a low seed. Tsitsipas is a low seed. I went with Tsitsipas just to kind of point out how bad it's been for him recently. Last straight set win for Tsitsipas was Rome. That was his last straight set win. And even in his best of days, fast outdoor hard court, it can be tough on him. And I know he had a great run to the Cincinnati final a few years back, so he has had success at this event. But outdoor hard court has not been his happiest hunting ground. And he gets the winner of Colton Smith and Fabian Marozsan. Marozsan, 7-5 record against top 20 opponents at Masters 1000 events. Colton Smith, somebody who I've followed quite a bit coming out of the University of Arizona. Not the most athletic player, but great skills. Quality serving, quality net rushing, good off both wings, but the backhand relatively is going to be the standout ground stroke for Colton. But he's a very solid player who I think will relish the opportunity to come up against Stefanos Tsitsipas, which would be by name recognition Smith's best win. Quarterfinal prediction here in a quarter that I think is the most vulnerable, the softest in the draw. I've got Sinner over Musetti. As I said, Musetti has not been on a good stretch, losing 3 setters against Norrie and Mickelson. That said, I've got some sympathy/respect for those losses, given the fact that they were tight score lines, given the fact that Mickelson and Norrie on their day on hard court, they are legitimate top 25 to top 30 kind of players. So it's not as if that Musetti took a couple of horrible losses. I'm looking at the draw. I don't really think your Norries and Mickelsons of the world are going to be in the conversation here. Nobody is going to be quite that tough on him, and I think he'll tough out these matches even though he's not in the best of form, and hard court takes away a little bit of what Musetti loves to do. But on a hard court against Sinner, I think the serve return dynamics, Musetti just gives up too much in the 1-4 shot rallies. Sinner got to Cincy nice and early. He's back on his most comfortable surface. He happened to get the softest quarter in this draw. I think he's a matchup nightmare for Diallo, who has to try to force his way forward, but that's really hard to do against Sinner. It would be cool to see Mahach at full power again. That would be fun. I'd like to see it, but you can't rely on it. Tommy Paul can redline on a quick hard court if he's back at his best in his first event back from injury, but even if he is, how long can he do that for? Tommy Paul is a very known commodity and known entity to Jannik Sinner at this point. They've played a lot. It's gone a very similar way most of the time. So, Sinner through to the semis. Taylor Fritz is the 4 seed. He's got Rune, Tiafoe, Caboli, Davidovich Fokina, Humbert, Mickelson, and Sonego. Dark horse here is Borna Coric. Upset alert is Hugo Humbert. Early popcorn is Davidovich Fokina versus Fonseca, round number 2. Coric has had a really interesting year. He has torn up the challengers, but then he's found himself needing rest and disrupting all of his momentum. He has not played a lot, and I think he must have gotten hurt for grass court season because he didn't play on the grass. But even after building up a ton of momentum in the lead up to Rome, didn't want to play Rome due to fatigue, just missed the Roland Garros cutoff, lost in the first round of Roland Garros qualies, and then had to go back home and continue to rest for another 2 weeks. So it's been a stop and start season, but you're thinking, all right, we know that Coric maybe isn't the top 15 player that we once thought that he was going to be. Or I'm not going to say once thought. I don't know what I thought, but he once was a top 15 player as a young player. Maybe he's not that, but he's better than somebody who's ranked in the 90s. It's the same Coric we know. Just watching him, and I got to watch him a lot in Aix-en-Provence, the 4th challenger of the year that he won. Still a physical beast, still a mental beast. Won't blow you away with his racket talent, but can he beat a jaded Taylor Fritz? That's the question. It's been a ton of tennis for Taylor, just a ton. And I do kind of feel like we've reached the tipping point for Fritz fatigue-wise, potentially in Cincinnati. I just don't know how many more weeks in a row he can go deep, given he didn't have much of a rest after Wimbledon, which capped off as busy a grass court season as you can really possibly have, although he didn't go deep in Queens. So, Borna Coric, is he gonna find something? It's kind of now or never here, I feel like, for Borna. Upset alert is Hugo Humbert. This guy just seems to hate playing in North America. That's all I've got. He doesn't win in North America. He's never reached the 3rd round. Never reached the 3rd round in Canada, Cincinnati, or New York. Kind of wild. And the court speed, it suits him, especially since I feel like they've sped up Canada. Humbert wants it nice and quick. It's been nice and quick for him. He just doesn't play well in this part of the world. Who does he have first round? Or second round, I should say, with the bye. He's going to play Colton Wong, who beat Petchy Perricard 3-2. Colton Wong's been thrifty, actually. He's had some big wins this year, and they've come at Masters 1000s. Popcorn matchup, Fonseca versus Davidovich Fokina. Foki, in general, just individually, has been one of the best watches on hard courts out of anyone this year. He's playing explosive tennis. He's staying a little bit more engaged and consistent, competing a bit better. Fonseca beat Buyun Chauquete 7-5 in the 3rd. Much needed for Joao. Hard court right now, statistically, Fonseca's best surface by some distance. A lot of that has to do with the great run that he went on from the Next Gen Finals through the start of this year. But I think that's notable at this point in Fonseca's career, and it'll feel good for him to, I think, grit out a very tough win and then to have an extra day of rest before the 2nd round match against Davidovich Fokina. Alejandro has also played an unreal amount of tennis, but it caught up with him in the quarters in Canada because he ended up retiring from his match against Khachanov, and I do not think he was injured. I think he actually hit empty, and it's the first time I've ever seen Davidovich Fokina get tired, really, in all my years watching him. And sorry, he was playing Rublev, not Khachanov, and it was a round of 16 match. Quarterfinal. Let's go to the quarterfinal prediction. I've got Frances Tiafoe defeating Davidovich Fokina. I do think this quarter is gonna include some chaos. There's gonna be some shakeups here. I mentioned that Fritz fatigue. Davidovich Fokina continues to be one of the more consistent winners in early rounds, and I have no problem predicting that to continue for now because I've always believed in the ability of Fokina. So I'm not going to say, all right, I think this is just a good stretch for him. No, I think he can maintain this. So that's the top half. On the bottom half, you've got Rune, who played 2 great matches in Toronto before losing to Popyrin. And although Popyrin played... it was an amazing title defense last week where Alexei came in having not won 2 matches in a row on a hard court. He certainly hadn't won 3 matches in a row on a hard court since the Miracle Montreal title last year. And he went deep again to at least minimize the damage on his ranking. It was awesome. But I think it was a huge missed opportunity for Holger Rune, especially because that was a night match. The conditions that Holger loves, but he had no command over his forehand. And I'm not really super confident that he'll fare better this week because he's not going to get those cool night sessions necessarily again. He's not going to get the draw opportunity that I think existed in Canada. It just felt like a 1,000 that Holger maybe could have turned up and won based on his draw positioning and how he was being scheduled. So I felt like it was a missed opportunity for Rune. Tiafoe made the final here last year. He loves it quick. He loves ramping up for the U.S. Open at this event. And watching him, has Tiafoe been 10 out of 10 recently? No, but he's been 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, close enough that I can buy Tiafoe getting to his best this week. So Francis back to the Cincinnati semis is my prediction there. How about Alexander Zverev's quarter? He is the 3 seed. Shelton, Medvedev, Khachanov, Fils, Lehechka, Nakashima. Dark horse here? None, but I want to kind of talk about Brandon Holt. Upset alert, Daniil Medvedev. Early popcorn. Monfils withdrew, threw a wrench in my early popcorn. Shelton versus Nishikori, maybe, could happen, but K coming off of injury, I don't know how much I would really, truly expect out of that. I don't even know how much I would assume that will happen because K Nishikori would, of course, need to win his first-round match against Camilo Hugo Carabelli, who he's had a great season on clay. He's going to make a lot of balls, that's for sure. Strong legs. Great mover. All right, no dark horse, but Holt will play the winner. Holt will play Tristan Boyer, fellow wild card in the first round. Very winnable one for Brandon. And then Yuri Lehechka in the second round, which isn't as winnable. And I do think that he'll be outgunned, and he won't really be able to disrupt Lehechka enough to keep that power at bay. But I do expect Holt to make some strides here in the rankings, and he's somebody who I am interested in watching because he's done well at the challenger level, and he's not going to blow you away on the eye test because he doesn't hit that big, but his depth and consistency, like his ability to just trade deep in the court, especially on his backhand, be very disciplined, be very, very low on the errors is it stands out to me. So I like him a lot. Upset alert is Daniil Medvedev. There's not much I need to say about this other than how upset-prone Daniil has been. Of his 16 losses this year, 14 of them are against players ranked lower than him. So what does that mean? It means he's not going deep enough to even play the top players. He's losing most of his close matches. He is making mistakes on big points because his confidence is shot right now. Opener is favorable. He'll play the winner of Walton and Novone. Lehechka next, probably. Lehechka beat him the last time they played. So Medvedev just looking vulnerable in general right now. Wasn't able to flip the switch in Canada, even though I thought there was some opportunity for him to do so potentially. And it looks like I don't have my quarterfinal prediction on my slides here. So I'm going to have to verbal it. Oh, that's why I didn't That's why I don't have it on my slides, because I actually was struggling with the prediction here. I wrote it down in my notes as TBD. I definitely like Lehechka to come out of the top half, but on the bottom half, I am having difficulty figuring out who to go with here. I underlooked Zverev in Toronto. Didn't have him making the semis, and he did. But I didn't feel like he really proved me wrong. He gritted through his matches, but he lost to Khachanov, who was 1-6 in big ATP semifinals, 4-34 against top 5 players. And Khachanov didn't even serve great. Just didn't think Zverev was nearly at his best in that semifinal. Missing a lot of, just making a lot of mistakes off the ground that you would never expect Zverev to make. Shelton's first big 1,000 run, obviously, and he's here. Can he keep it going? That's a really tough task if you're not like a top 3 player. So if Ben struggles psychologically, physically, I won't be surprised. Would be totally understandable. Feast was here. He withdrew. Lehechka played well last week. He's the best. He's at his best on hard court. He challenges top 20 players regularly. So I definitely have him. On the bottom half, let me make a flash decision. Again, it's do I go Zverev? Do I go Khachanov? Look, it's probably going to be Zverev. I'll say it's Zverev through to the quarters. I think Khachanov has a chance to keep it going. Karen has won at least 3 matches at his last 3 tournaments in a row. And I'm not usually too concerned about him on a quick turnaround because his body is so durable and because mentally he just always seems to bring pretty much the same thing day in and day out. So maybe Khachanov can win a rematch with Zverev. But in general, I think there's a reason that Zverev had been pretty dominant in that head-to-head, especially if you look at the score lines the last 3 times that they had played up until that semifinal. So maybe he plays a better match and beats Khachanov. I'll go Lehechka over Zverev in the quarterfinals. Wrapping things up with Carlos Alcaraz's quarter, he's got de Minaur, Rublev, Menchik, Popyrin, Shapovalov, Griekspoor, and Dartery. Dark horse here is Jaume Munar. Upset alert, Talon Griekspoor, early popcorn, Alcaraz versus the winner of Bellucci and Zhumer. Munar has been one of the most common dark horses on the tour all year long. He's been just really frisky against players ranked above him, especially on hard court, believe it or not. More so than on clay. I think against Comasagna opener, he'll be able to find a lot of forehands. He'll be able to use his creativity to finish because Comasagna gives up so much time and position. Then he's got Dartery, who I want to say is seeded at a 1,000 for the first time in his career. I want to say that. I don't know how comfortable Dartery will be right away in these conditions coming off of the slow clay. De Minaur would be Munar's seed. Alex is tough, but Alex doesn't always like to play guys who force him to create on his forehand, who stay just as solid as him, who kind of match him for the willingness to run and hang in long rallies. So I think we could see something from Munar this week. Upset alert is Griekspoor. I haven't liked his losses recently. Not that these guys aren't good players, but he loses to Brooksby. He loses to De Jong. He loses to Echeverry. All players who shouldn't be able to hurt Griekspoor very often. Griekspoor has way better weapons than all those guys. It tells me that he's making a lot of errors, that he's missing a lot of balls. That's what that tells me. And he'll either get Kovacevic in his first match. Kovacevic has had a very interesting year. He either loses in the first round or he makes the final. That's basically been Alexander Kovacevic's season. So you don't want to play him off of a win. Medjedovic, he got hurt at Wimbledon. I don't know what kind of physical shape he's in at this point, but he's obviously a dangerous server with a 19-10 career record at hard court tour level events. Quick conditions, can get into tie breaks, uncomfortable matchup for Griekspoor. Popcorn is Alcaraz versus the winner of Bellucci Zhumer. Both of those guys in Bellucci, Mattia Bellucci and Damir Zhumer, are super, super fun to watch. Bellucci might have the biggest serve for his height I've ever seen. He's small and quick, but he loves to attack. He plays with a lot of flair. He tries to bring it to his opponents. Zoomer is a speedster, a drop shot artist who keeps the errors to a minimum. These two, Alcaraz and Zoomer, did play at Roland Garros, and they delivered with a pretty entertaining night session. Quarterfinals. I have got Carlos Alcaraz defeats Andrei Rublev. I really like how Rublev served last week. First serve was massive for him. He usually deals with de Minaur's flat ball really well. I think he's been finding some stability in his game. So I'll go Rublev over de Minaur. Alcaraz has been... he's got some vulnerable seeds. So it's a good draw for Carlos. He usually needs some matches under his belt in order to really find it and play well. So I think a favorable draw is important for Alcaraz, and he got it. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's below his regular level, but I expect him to come through. All right. Final weekend prediction in 3, 2. Dimitrov over Sinner, 3 sets. Whoa, this is from last year. All right. We're going to have to go to the notes. Yeah, I had Dimitrov winning Cincinnati last year. Didn't happen. Sinner over Tiafoe. Alcaraz over Lehechka. Obviously, I have double-digit seeds making the semis, which makes things a little bit easier on Sinner and Alcaraz. Of course, pretty tough to go against them if you're imagining that not only are they the favorites in those matchups, but they would have already worked their way into the tournaments. And on top of that, Sinner beat Tiafoe pretty convincingly last year in the final at this event, leads the head-to-head 4-1. On the Alcaraz-Lehechka side of things, Carlos has actually struggled with Lehechka, but already avenged the February loss in Doha with a win at Queen's Club, which would set up another Alcaraz-Sinner final. It would be the 3rd event in a row. No, the 4th. Yeah, wow. So they played in Rome, ended up in the final, Roland Garros. Sinner was in Halle, so they didn't play a grass court event until Wimbledon. That ended up being the final. So this would be 5 straight Sin-Caraz finals when they share a draw. You could argue law of averages says it's not happening this time, but that's not what we're that's somewhat of a fallacy for also going to get into math here. Anyway, it's Alcaraz's turn to make an adjustment in this head-to-head after Sinner got him at Wimbledon. But conditions-wise, this is everything you want if you're Jannik Sinner. You've got best of 3, you've got hard court, you've got fast conditions, and this is also the time of year that I think Sinner will benefit from a level of freshness, physically and mentally, that results from the light schedule that he has been able to enjoy this year, partially not by his choosing, partially because of the suspension. But the fact that he was able to get that post-Wimbledon rest, and of course, he didn't play from the Australian Open up until Rome. This is a time of year where guys are feeling it. Burnt out. Physical little ailments popping up everywhere. I think Sinner is not going to be dealing with any of that stuff at all. That'll make him even more dangerous, and he certainly doesn't need any help being dangerous. He's been the best player he's been a dominant player at hardcourt 1000s in the last couple of years, regardless. So that will do it for coverage. I actually cover a challenger next week in Sumter, so I'm not exactly sure what the schedule is going to look like. Honestly, it's jam-packed for me because after Sumter, I head straight to New York for coverage of Fan Week for U.S. Open Radio, but I'm going to try my best to keep the content flowing, and certainly will be at full force starting at the U.S. Open quarterfinals, where I'll be full-time content. But of course, we'll have U.S. Open preview, hopefully U.S. Open power rankings. Again, I'll try to keep it going, but it's all going to be under some tight schedule circumstances. Thanks for being with me for this one, bearing with the lateness here on the preview. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.